Island is a visual novel developed by Front Wing, which was released in Japan in early 2016 and later released for the Western world in late 2018. Studio Phil picked up the series and released its anime for the summer season of 2018. The anime wasn't all that well received, and since I got a copy of the visual novel around my birthday, I decided to 100% the novel and see exactly why people didn't like this adaptation. When I started up the first episode, some of the reception that it had started to make sense. The anime doesn't go through the events of the visual novel in the same way, and it comes off as wrong because of how vastly different it is at a glance. As I continued watching, however, I noticed that it has the same major events that happened in the visual novel, and that is where I started thinking about how it really stood out as an adaptation. Personally, I don't believe an adaptation of a work needs to be done in the same exact way as long as it still incorporates really important events to the story. So, I'm going to be talking about some major differences between the visual novel and the anime adaptation. Keep in mind that, since this is going to be comparing parts of the anime with the visual novel, there will be some spoilers in this video. I will try to avoid major spoilers as much as I can, but if you want to discover the secrets of the series on your own, I advise you stop watching right here. Both versions of Island start off with our protagonist, Sanzenkai Setsuna, waking up on the beach naked with only a CD in his possession, who believes that he's come from the future and he has no memory other than his own name and the name of someone that he must protect in order to save the world, Rine. This is where the versions diverge by a vast amount, and because of it, it's honestly like getting into something completely new. The anime still holds up the story of the series pretty well because it maintains the major parts, but the studio did take some of its own liberties with the events that lead up to them, so that this massive story could fit into a 12-episode season. They removed things related to the romance events of Karen Kurutsu and Sarah Garando's paths, but that's something that can be easily overlooked because this is adapting the true route of the visual novel. They include summarized versions of the Karen and Sarah routes within the anime, and it's honestly really well done. It manages to avoid a problem that I see with most animes that have clear-cut routes, which is time warping back to the beginning of a decision point, rendering everything that you just watched meaningless. Throughout the visual novel, the routes have themes involving escapism, acceptance, and illusion, but the anime gives you a much more watered-down version of those themes for each respective girl that they relate to, while also managing to keep the resolve that those individual routes instilled within the characters, because it tries to respect their true personalities from the source material. Because of all the routes being merged into one for the anime, you end up getting the context from the other routes, and that's what helps you understand the story a little bit better. In the visual novel, information from other routes come into play to help you solve the overall mystery of the island through you remembering seemingly minor details, such as certain people, how you interacted with the other girls at a certain time, or even events that happen along the calendar that are at fixed points and will always happen no matter what you choose. The downside to this decision is that the anime's beginning feels really rushed and the pacing for the series in general just seems off. But this could have been avoided if the anime was done in 2 cours instead of 1, since it'd have time to flesh out the more important details. Out of all the scenes, the one part of the story that heavily suffers from the changes to the adaptation is the scenes with Boryujima. The removal of the offshore platform in the anime, which was incredibly important to the plot, ended up making the scenes connected to it feel somewhat forced, and it makes it really tough to watch because it doesn't really make the best sense anymore. Because of this, it also glazes over one really important scene that was completely changed to fit the adaptation, and it severely lowers the impact that it's supposed to have on you. In order to completely compare this adaptation, there's one part that I absolutely have to discuss, and this will be the only major spoiler that I will explicitly talk about: Never Island and the events following it. The winter route was shortened severely within this adaptation, and it's the part that is hardest for me to watch because it was the longest of the visual novel, ending somewhere between 25 and 30 hours for me. Some of the changes within it make complete sense for this adaptation, but it's the only part of the anime that I feel completely disrespects the source material. Some of the major events within the Never Island timeframe were changed, which significantly shifts the plot and leaves some important characters to not get any development that has to happen in order to affect Setsuna as a person. The fixed things that were supposed to happen still do, but they're so vastly different to the degree that it doesn't give you much of an impact, especially considering we only spend an episode getting to know these newer characters. The stuff it glazes over is what a visual novel reader should already have knowledge of, but if you never got your hands on it, it's incredibly confusing because the anime assumes that you know what's happening already. The few changes that I actually liked within this part of the story were parts that fixed the holes in the writing from the visual novel, like how a 13-year-old girl pulled a man twice her size and weight over several hundreds of feet without anyone seeing them. There are also some details in the anime that get alluded to, but are never explicitly said because of the subject matter, mainly pertaining to the fact that Karen Kurz is a hooker. The ending for the anime is honestly pretty amazing. It's incredibly different from the visual novel, but I'm sure anyone who's read it will agree that this ending was much better than that one. It wraps up things nicely, but it's still a bit too fast in its pacing. The best part about the entire thing is that it fixes a lot of the problems that the visual novel had on the way to the true ending, especially pertaining to the holes and unexplained bits that it wants you to imagine for yourself. The anime gives you a kind of closure that the mystery of the visual novel will never give you. Within the anime, the characters are still wholly the same as they are in the visual novel despite the scenes that were changed. The only majorly different one is our protagonist, Setsuna. Throughout the anime, he's a lot more serious and mature in demeanor compared to his visual novel counterpart because of the lack of banter and teasing that he does to the other characters, and that's what I feel is the largest downside to the characters in the adaptation. Ura and Arima not being in the anime at all is a pretty sad thing to see when transitioning to watch, considering she was a character to give off some pretty important scenes within the visual novel, but at least the importance related to her was still conveyed within the anime. All in all, this anime was a pretty good adaptation from the visual novel. People really blew the reception of this out of proportion because I felt it delivered the true story of Island pretty well. The best part about this anime, though, is the fact that if you go to read the visual novel, going through the events of the story will still be a surprise to you since you've only had the most major events revealed. While you could very well watch this anime without any knowledge of the visual novel, it's been clear as day from the first moment that this adaptation is pure fanfare to the story's readers. Keep in mind, there's a secret in this world, and when it is revealed, there will be a revolution, so come along with me and believe in the journey of Saint Setsuna. You won't regret a single moment you spend.